Okay. All right. We are recording. Let's go ahead and try to do a roll call. Ken.
All right. Nicole Bailey. I do not see her present. Andrea Cherubogaflor, also not present. John Connolly.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Forbes.
Here.
All right. Captain Hahn.
Here.
Thank you. Troy Hill. Do not see him present. Jim House. Do not see him present either. Nicole Lawless is also not here. Michael Pierce.
Here.
Thank you. Officer Prunski.
Here.
Thank you. Brandon Rich. Do not see him. Jeffrey Reister. Do not see him. Nathan Riley, that's myself, I am present. And Joyanne Rusha.
I'm here.
Right.
Thank you. So that's 7, Trevor. If we get one more, we have a quorum and we could approve the minutes.
Great. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and proceed with discussion items. And yeah, maybe someone will jump in and we can approve the minutes. That's kind of the administrative task that I think we're going to struggle with. So welcome, everyone. I hope everyone had a great summer. First, I'd like to apologize for getting the agenda out so late. I would make up an excuse, but that would be untrue. I literally just forgot. And so I apologize, but next time I'll make sure and get it out sooner and set a calendar reminder. We have the minutes to approve, but as Mr. Riley just mentioned, we do not have a quorum, so we will not be able to do that today. So
Actually, hold on real quick, Trevor, and jump in here, Mr. Roberts, if you want. So one of the administrative items I had for today is we've actually had 2 resignations to the towing task force. We had Nicole Lawless. She actually resigned back in April. It was actually the same day as our last meeting, April 12th. So she submitted her resignation. I've since processed it over here with the department. And we actually had another one come in for Andrea Cherubogaflor. She also resigned. I guess she's going to be taking a job out of state. And so she submitted her resignation, which was effective on June 5th. So a little over a month ago. So again, I've been working on the administrative side of things to get them offboarded and handle that. I think our plan is to backfill those 2 positions. Both Andrea and Ms. Lawless, they both filled the spot on the task force or the specific role on the task force for representing communities that may be disproportionately affected by non-consensual towing. So they both filled. That's a two role spot in the statute. So I'm hoping that would make potential recruiting to backfill those positions easier because they both fill the same role, so we can look at the same types of people. But we haven't started that process yet. But to Mr. Roberts, I wasn't sure if so we currently have 7 members present out of a 14-member board, which is 50%. So I would think that alone would be enough to demonstrate a quorum, but I don't know how that splices with the fact that we have 2 currently vacant positions, if you want to comment on that.
Sure. So what's the total statutory complement for this task force, Nate?
14.
Okay, and we have 7.
Correct.
And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 present.
Correct.
I think we're good.
Okay. Do we want to do the approval of the minutes, Trevor?
yes, awesome. So I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the minutes from I'll get this right. 10/26/22, 12/14/2022, 1/11/2023, 2/8/2023, 3/8/2023, and 4/12/2023.
I'll move that.
Can I get a second?
I would like to, well, I'm okay with seconding it as long as we can comment on the contents of the minutes.
Sure, Mr. Pierce. Go ahead.
Okay. I was hoping to make sure that my objection to the section on non-consensual or on comparing consensual with non-consensual towing rates. What's in there is that I made a motion to drop that entire section. I would request to have the grounds for dropping that included in the minutes.
Okay, so in order, if we approve the minutes, then we'd kind of be done with them. So are you saying that we should not approve the minutes because some of the minutes are incorrect? Because that would be I think administratively, we're just wanting to say minutes, are correct and approving them. But are you saying that you believe the minutes for one of the meetings are incorrect?
I wouldn't put it in those exact terms. I would say that they are misleading without that further context, that they are not complete enough to represent what happened during that meeting.
So,
Okay.
if I may, Trevor, just a point of order. If we just want to follow general parliamentary procedure, Michael could just make a motion to amend the minutes. And
Okay,
I think that's what he's trying to do. And if that is his motion, I would second it, and then we can vote on that, if that works with you, Mr. Chair,
that sounds like a great idea.
versus a straight up or down.
I agree. So Mr. Pierce, do you have an amendment to the minutes that you'd like to propose?
Sure.
And if
I
you
have
could specify which minutes you're talking about, please.
Yeah.
10:26 minutes.
Okay.
And let me let's see if I can call them up. And then the section that I was concerned with. Yeah. Okay, so on page 2, sorry, I had it right in front of me before and then lost it. Okay, towards the bottom, there's a sentence that begins with Wallace made a motion to add language on. And then it says Pierce made a motion to change recommendation 3 entirely. I would like that to read instead that Pierce objected to including recommendation 3 because the task force did not discuss it in any prior meetings, and there were only 2 days to review the material before voting on it.
Okay. You capture that, Mr. Riley, so we could add that in.
Okay, so it would be replacing, Pierce made a motion to change recommendation 3 entirely, which would be replaced with,
It would be appending what I just said right in front of that. We're inserting that.
okay, so inserting a sentence prior to that sentence?
Right.
Okay, so then that sentence from before that would read, Pierce objected to recommendation 3 because the towing task force did not discuss it in any other meetings, and there was only 2 days to review the materials before voting on it.
Right.
Okay, I got it.
Okay, and Ms. Rusha, I believe you were going to second that amendment.
Yes, I'll second that.
Okay, any opposed? No, okay, the motion passes. So now I'd ask for a motion to approve the minutes with the inclusion of the amendment that Mr. Pierce just put forth. If I could get a motion for that. Someone could just say so moved, and then we could.
So moved.
Okay, can I get a second?
Second.
Any objected or anyone object? Okay, minutes are approved. All right, thank you, Mr. Pierce. Okay, got that knocked out. Okay, so what we had on the agenda, although if someone has any, we had on the agenda to discuss whether or not CPI was an appropriate measure for rate adjustments. And if not, is there a path to come up with a more appropriate measure on the agenda? However, I'll stop here and see if anyone has any other topics they'd like to discuss before we go into that item. Okay. Okay. So I'll just start with kind of my position on this topic is effectively, sure, right? I suspect that there is likely some sort of metric, whether it's from the Bureau of Labor Statistics or not, that is more appropriate to the costs associated with towing. The price of bread and milk and things like that don't really directly impact, the direct costs for operating a tow truck and a storage facility and all that other kind of stuff. So I would certainly be open to, finding some other measure that we could propose to the Public Utilities Commission. I don't have an idea at the moment, but if everyone else is agreeing, I'd certainly be okay with researching that and discussing it at the next meeting. But I'll leave it there and see if anyone has any other thoughts on this item. Ms. Ruscia.
Thank you. Just for my edification, did the committee settle, or is it still up for discussion, that we would find a specific metric, or have we also just discussed the potential of just settling on like a percentage, a set percentage? Or does that make sense? Is that still up for debate as well?
Yeah, I think anything's up for sure. I think what we discussed is, hey, is that worthwhile, and does it make sense to go look and see if there's a different metric? And if so, then we could all kind of independently, go look up ideas and maybe do a little math on what that might look like. And then during a subsequent meeting could, individuals could present a proposal on, hey, there's this CPI measure that only includes fuel or only includes whatever, and maybe this is better. And then we could discuss and debate that and possibly pass or not pass that. As far as using a fixed percentage, I don't think we discussed that, but certainly if you have some thoughts on that, I'd love to hear, because that would certainly make the PUC's life a little easier. It would be more transparent to everybody. But if you have some more thoughts on that, I'd love to hear them.
Well, I think, for some, it was actually just that, it's a set expectation, and some of these other metrics that currently exist are arbitrary. And I think if we just tried to tie it to inflation, you can make an argument that's not really fair on that behalf of the consumer, because that hurts the consumer more than it's going to hurt the operator. And so that's why I thought that might be, that might be a compromise. Additionally, and maybe Mr. Riley can weigh in here. For some institutions, instead of doing or permitting a rate increase every year, it's like every 2 or 3 years. And so I don't know if that is also something that the committee would want to consider, having something more consistent on a calendar that doesn't have, I would say, doesn't have very many surprises, and then would only need to be readjusted, if there were some sort of, statistically relevant data suggesting that it was out of line, with the original intent of the price setting. Does that make sense? So I was just wondering if that might make it easier on everyone, and also allow businesses to plan better, if that makes sense. And I'm not married to it. I just wanted to put it out there and wondered if the committee had discussed that.
I don't think so. Just for a data point, I can tell you there are states that do it biannually, based on like a state fiscal year, as opposed to annually. I've seen it, majority of the time it's annually, but there is a data points out there of states that do it on a biannual basis, for example. So just throwing that out there, that I know that does exist. Mr. Peters.
Another option to include there. I'm really curious to hear feedback on setting rates every other year, just for how that would work with businesses. But another option that I think we might have thought about, but I forget if we did, is to do rolling averages, so that we're not doing things like years where we've got blips such as COVID, the COVID economy adversely affecting the rates in a really strange way. A rolling average basically provides you with a way of smoothing out the rate increases so that they're not quite so harsh, either on the lows or on the highs.
Okay. Mr. Connolly.
Just for some history, the price increases used to happen every 4 to 5 years, and that was not working. That's why we went to an annual, and even the annual in the CPI doesn't cover drastic changes that the industry sees. In 2016, we saw a 300% increase in insurance. Just this last year, we saw a drastic increase in truck pricing, with trucks hard to find, etc. I mean, standard light duty truck went up almost 30 grand from May of last year to May of this year. So there's a lot of things that CPI doesn't cover, and we got to be coherent of that as well.
Yeah. Mr. Riley.
Just wanted to respond to Ms. Rush's comments. I know she had asked me to jump in. So first off, I think the commission would be open to really any ideas that this group comes up with. And I mean, it could be for a variety of different reasons. It could be on things that are more tangible, or, things that maybe are perceived a different way. But I think they'd be open to input on, for example, which metric they're using, because admittedly, the current rules and pulling from the CPI for these inflation adjustments that are done on an annual basis, that's kind of a new concept that the commission is trying. And, I don't think we have the longevity of that mechanism being in place to know whether or not it's an appropriate mechanism to use, but it is something that the commission was open to trying out and seeing if it worked and if it met the proper balance between the needs of the industry and the needs of the consumer as well. So I think we're kind of still in the early stages of figuring out if that works or not. I think they would probably.
Are others experience the loss of Nate?
Yes.
I think we lost Nate.
Probably
Yeah,
be
Nate's-
open. Oh,
Nate's,
my,
Nate's wrestling with that Dora
sorry.
Wi-Fi they got.
Sorry, I actually am on Wi-Fi today. I'm usually hard lined in, but I had an issue today that didn't work. Where did you lose me?
At the beginning.
Oh, really? At the beginning? Oh, geez. Sorry about that. But anyway, I was just saying, I think the commission would be open to, any ideas that are put forth by this body, and, whether it's exploring other metrics to use beyond the CPI, maybe a more specific one that's a little more tailored towards towing related activities and costs. I think that they'd be open to that. I think they'd be open to exploring whether or not doing it on an annual basis or doing it on like an every other year kind of situation is more appropriate. I think they'd be open to any of those ideas that this group wants to put forth. I do also, again, this is a new concept that the commission is trying, and it's not really been done before, to my knowledge, where there's a regular cost increase to specific maximum rate caps. So we are kind of still in the early stages of the commission trying out this new mechanism to see if it works, to see if it's something that's appropriate both from the industry and consumer standpoint. So again, we're still kind of getting a feel for it because we're only in, I think, year like 2 of doing this, 2 or 3. And so we're still kind of feeling out whether or not it's the most appropriate cost adjustment mechanism to use or not. So that would just be my comment on that.
Thank you, Charlie. And just to clarify some things about how the program works now. And keep in mind it's a lagging CPI, right? So in 1 year, if like let's say the CPI goes up 5%, right? 3 months after that year's over is when the new rates go in place, and then they go forward from there. So in some sense, the consumer is already kind of there's a slight amount of leeway baked into it. Now, this is assuming that CPI it continues to be a positive number. It certainly can and has in the past been a negative number, in which case that would not be ideal for the consumer, right? Because it would go down, but the decrease would lag the consumer's actual decrease in spending power. But there's a lag there, so it's not in the year in which you had it. So, for example, 2022, the March rate increases were based on CPI during 2021. Mr. Pierce's idea about possibly smoothing it out. I don't have any face value that seems completely reasonable. It would smooth things out, I suppose. Over the long term, I think it'd work itself out. I don't know that it would really solve any particular problem. If that made a rate go from $20.73 to $20.72 in a given year, and then the next year you caught up on the other 2 cents, I don't know that has any meaningful impact, frankly, on consumers or businesses. But certainly, I don't think there'd be anything wrong with doing it. Ms. Ruscia.
You're still on mute.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, thank you. So for me personally, from a consumer standpoint, and I raised this last year, I have issues with some of the fees that we're allowed to charge that I don't think are necessarily logical or fair to the consumer. And so I think, like for example, the after hours fee, if you're towing after hours, it's profitable. And so I'm not sure why we would charge the consumer a premium for that. So I think that from a holistic, I think we need to also look at this holistically when we talk about costs, because our fee structure, right, we have a lot of columns. It's not as simplified as some other states. And so that was actually one of the concerns I had about using the CPI, because I felt some of our structure was arbitrary, but the CPI felt arbitrary, although I understood why the PUC used it, right? There aren't many tools out there, and it's certainly a commonly used tool metric. We know what the CPI is. But anyway, so I just wanted to kind of point that out, that this discussion doesn't really happen in a vacuum, and we have different types of fees in non-consensual towing for whatever that's worth. And I don't know if that needs to be also considered as well.
Okay, Mr. Pierce.
Actually, I think John was Mr. Connolly was ahead of me, so I defer to Mr. Connolly.
Okay, I just wanted to touch on that after hours release, and I don't know how, I guess I'm in it every day, so I see why and why for and the how comes when I have different departments. So I have a dispatch department. I have an impound department. I have a shop department. I have driver department. So my dispatch is 24 hours a day. My drivers are 24 hours a day. I mean, obviously it's not always the same drivers, not always the same dispatchers. So when the impound's closed, to do an after hours release, I have to pay someone to come in after hours, open up the office. I also have to pay to have someone come down and do the yard tech to get the vehicle out of the yard. So when I'm bringing 2 people in after hours and I got to pay overtime on that, that's why we do an after hours release fee. I don't know if that helps put some context into it.
Yeah, I'll just dovetail off that a little bit, just to, this isn't a comment on whether it's appropriate or not, just kind of how the operations actually work.
Exactly.
Yeah, you do tow at night, or some tow companies do, not all, right?
Right.
It's not like the driver who's responding to, Mr. Prunsky's wreck on the side of the road is also the person who can physically be at the facility releasing cars. Those are 2 separate roles, 2 separate sets of employees. And having somebody work kind of in the middle of the night, especially given the fact that the vast majority of cars are retrieved during the day, you effectively are having to cover a cost for a very low density transaction. So it's like vast majority of people are picking their cars up in the morning or during the afternoon or whatever, not showing up in the middle of the night. And so the idea behind it was like, look, like somebody, we want to make it to where tow companies are required to give someone their car at 3 a.m. Because it turns out sometimes someone needs their car at 3 a.m., right? They got towed from the bar and it's 3 a.m. or they got in a wreck or whatever, but they needed to go to work in the morning. So we want to make sure that tow companies are required to have someone show up within an hour to release that car, right? Because that's a good thing for the consumer. However, we also recognize that that's a very significant expense for a tow operator to wake one of their employees up in the middle of the night or have someone on call 24/7, 365 to go release that vehicle. So there's going to be an after hours fee release, associated with that. Now, bear in mind that the individual doesn't have to go pick it up at 3 a.m. That's not a requirement. In fact, I don't know what other companies, but I know in our company, when folks call at one of our outlying facilities, we don't, even though there's an after hours fee, like our employees don't want to go release that car in the middle of the night. So they will tell them, like, if you wait till 8 a.m., it will be X number of dollars cheaper. And so they literally tell them, like, why don't you wait? Now, some people want their car right then and they're willing to pay that after hours fee. But the key is the consumer has the choice, right? They can wait until 8 a.m. I would submit that it's probably would not be a terrible thing to tell tow companies that, hey, on your website or, on your audio recordings or whatever, to maybe lay that out for consumers to make sure that they know that, hey, you don't have to come before 8 a.m. or after 5 p.m. or whatever. If you come during regular business hours, it's cheaper. I could certainly see that being something that tow companies should do. But the consumer is not forced to pick their car up during that time that requires an employee to go to the facility and release it.
Well, if I could clarify, so if the legislature passed a law that said that towing operators, couldn't tow vehicles, between the hours of 8 p.m. and 8 a.m., I'm sure that would cause a lot of consternation. And so what I'm saying is that, if it weren't profitable, right, like you guys wouldn't do it. So I understand, of course, there's going to be a cost, particularly as you get later on in the night, to having someone pick up their car. But we also have things like storage fees, and business hours could be, after 5:30 or after 6. So I think it isn't just the concept of an after hours fee, and not all states allow them, but also just the way that our fees are structured. It's not hard to get stuck in a situation, where your car is towed during happy hour on, the start of the weekend or something. And then that can just really add up just because of the timing. So that's what I mean by that. Of course, there's going to be a staffing cost, but there is clearly a profit margin if operators are towing at night and overnight. And someone has you're taking away someone's property. So again, from the consumer standpoint, we want, like you said, Trevor, people should be able to get their vehicles back. And I think we could have a better balance in terms of those fees. And maybe that balance is adjusting or being more specific as to what reasonable operating hours are. I think the rules, and maybe Nate can remind us again, I think they'd say business hours. And also when we talk about like the days, it's like a 24-hour period, if that's correct. So I don't know if we just need guardrails around that. Because again, our fee structure, some of that bill is just going to be dumb luck based on the time of day or week that you get towed. And I'm not sure how reasonable that really is, relative to what we're talking about here. But
Well-
I don't mean to get us off the discussion of like CPI, but because we just have, it's not just like we're talking about one or two fees, right? We have columns and rows of things that folks can be charged for. And so I just wanted to point that out. It might be reasonable to kind of look at this more holistically and see if we might want to make some changes, some recommended changes to that, that just strikes a better balance.
Yeah, I mean,
And
go ahead, Mr. Brunner. Go ahead.
I would say I would support what you were saying on the go with legislators and don't let towers tow at night. That would be awesome.
John, that would be good. Yeah, and that's certainly
I mean,
possible.
you can sleep, that would be really cool.
I mean, it'd be a problem for law enforcement agencies that want to clear wrecks and impound cars for DUIs, or single moms who work really late and get home at 9 p.m. and someone's in their parking spot.
Well, that's the problem. I mean, that's the other problem is there's so many different veins in the towing industry that when you look at PUC rules, it's a one Band-Aid fits all in most situations. And so that's where a lot of these areas get overlapped. That's where we have to come in with the guardrails and everything on a lot of rules, because it does kind of overlap. I mean, it's completely different towing here in Denver Metro versus towing in Grand Junction. Everything about it is different. It's the same concepts, but the structures of everything are completely different, but yet they have to follow the same rule pattern. So it does become a nightmare.
Yeah, it's a good point that John just made, that like, I think often folks, when they're thinking through this stuff, are thinking like the biggest towers. Often they're thinking of me, right? They're like, Wyatt's Towing or Connolly's Towing, a company that has, multiple employees and maybe even more than one location. But, I'll give you one example. I know a woman that we're close friends with that has a small towing company kind of in the Glenwood Springs area. She probably has 3 employees. I know for a fact that she personally clears about right around $100,000 in profit a year. So like that's her take home. That's how much she makes a year running her towing company, about $100,000. Just do some back of the envelope math. If she had to keep someone on staff overnight in order to release cars and receive no compensation for the fact that she had to get out of bed and go there, right? Just doing some back of the envelope math, you got eight extra hours that you have to staff times 365 days a year times probably fully burdened, call it $20 an hour after benefits, like at a minimum, you're looking at $58,000. So like that right there took her $100,000 to a $42,000 a year take home. And I know it seems trivial. You're like, oh, well, like this after hours, it would just be so easy and just make them be open because they tow cars at night anyway. Yeah, like a really large company, like if that, if you took that away from our business, like I'll be able to feed my kids. I'm just gonna be transparent. I would be able to, right? But I don't know if she could. And that's kind of the issue here, that I know that the perspective is that it's always, all towing is the evil Wyatt's Towing that is predatory and is preying on people and is just trying to earn a buck off the backs of poor folks. But it turns out that some of these towing companies, many of them, are owned by their family businesses with 3 or 4 employees, and they don't make a lot of money. I know everyone thinks everyone in the towing company industry is really rich, but they're not. And so these things that seem great for the consumer put her out of business. And then even if you don't care about her, like the law enforcement agency that's on that stretch of I-70 has a very hard time getting folks to actually tow for them. And so now they don't have a tower. And now you have public safety issues because no one's there to clear the roads. It's not as simple, I think, as just, well, it's not nice for the consumer. It's a complicated matter. Now, one option that I think me and Mr. Connolly both support, you could literally pass a rule or a law that said tow companies cannot charge consumers for towing, just like full stop. And then it would still have to happen at some point, and then the property owners would have to pay for the service, or the law enforcement agencies would have to pay for the service. And then at that point, you would remove it'd be a 100% consumer protection, right? Like no consumers would ever be harmed by having to get their car towed. It would never cost them any money. I mean, obviously inconvenient, but that's an option too. I don't know how that viable is from the perspective of other people, but I mean, Mr. Connolly would certainly support that. Mr. Riley.
Yeah, just to jump in real quick. So I know at the commission, we do really try to balance these rules. Obviously, consumer protection is a big part of not just our program or our division, but the overall department. I mean, it's something that the department feels very strongly about, not just at the PUC, but Division of Insurance, Division of Real Estate, Division of Securities, DPO, all of the different divisions within our department all factor in consumer protection quite heavily. And so we do factor that in. It is something that we are constantly discussing when we're talking about regulations, current rules, potential rules, all of that. But at the same time, we do also have to factor in, the industry and making sure that the industry can reasonably accommodate these regulations. And that if we put certain regulations in place, it doesn't become such a burden that it just drives a whole bunch of people in that industry out of business. It really is a fine balance, and it's difficult to achieve at times. But it is something we are constantly thinking about. And, that's why groups like this are important, is that we hear a variety of perspectives which are taking into account when we have these conversations. And again, some of them are behind closed doors and others are right there in the open for everyone else to participate in as well, like our rulemaking process. So yeah, that's what I would add, is just, it is sometimes difficult to find that fine balance between consumer protection and industry functionality. So I just wanted to add that.
Ms. Ruscia.
Thanks, Trevor. Well, we also have the storage fee. And as I noted before, like what is a day? We're talking about a 24-hour period. And then, what is hours, working hours? So perhaps, if either eliminating one or the other, or being very clear, or I guess making sure there's not that overlap, right? Like, so I shouldn't be charged for an after hours fee and then also being charged a storage fee because something crossed past midnight. Does that make sense? Like, so maybe there is a balance to be struck there, because, we have those are two separate fees. And I apologize, Mr. Riley. I may have a big no because I don't have the rules up in front of me right now. But I know that the rules, don't have times on them, probably because business, to be flexible to businesses. But I think that, maybe those are guardrails this committee could consider when making recommendations. Does that make sense? Like, again, we have multiple fees, and I understand why some of the rules aren't super prescriptive, right? But perhaps that has an unintended consequence for consumers, like for the example I just described. So again, it's not that I am not sympathetic to the costs of running a business, but I think there can be a better balance struck in our fee structure in terms of all of the things that a person can be charged for. Again, just like based on the
time of day, which can vary by towing company to towing company.
Mr. Pierce?
Thanks. Let's see, I'm hearing from Ms. Rusha, some points that I was just brainstorming about as well. One is just the incentivizing aspect here. So it sounds like in some cases there's an incentive to tow after hours because there's more profit in it. And I'm curious just to find out more under what conditions that actually occurs. Just because I'm aware of many reports from different manufactured home parks where most of the towing happens after hours, and people wake up where basically they don't have a car to go to work with, or they see it happening and aren't able to intervene in time to prevent the tow from happening. And then in order to get to work, they seem to find a need to go and get their car back during after hours. So at any rate, if we can dial down to those kinds of cases where there seems to be a proper incentive and trying to address that, I think that would be fairly nice. Another thought, and again, this is just brainstorming, and I would love to hear feedback, is to take out the way that the storage costs are structured, so that we're not thinking of the storage costs on a 24-hour day period, but rather something like the costs are considered as accruing during business hours. And in that kind of case, then you don't have some of the problems that Ms. Rusha brought up hitting at all, and you don't have people needing to go quite so desperately during after hours to get a tow in order to avoid the storage fees that are accruing overnight. And so there's less need for the consumer to do that in order to reduce their storage costs. So that's just an off-the-cuff suggestion as to how and some other structures might be implemented that might reduce some of the incentives here. So just throwing those out as possibilities.
Yeah, just one quick clarification, Mr. Pierce. For private property tows, the storage does accrue by the hour, right? So there is not the situation in which someone's like, well, I got to pay the after hours and hurry up, because if I don't, I'm going to hit the next 24-hour period and basically get a whole day of charges racking up. It's on a per hour basis.
That's what I was trying to address, is if it's on a per hour basis and you're towed, I mean, suppose hours are the hours of the company who towed end at 6 o'clock, they tow you at 6:30, right? And then you've got all of the after hours storage fees accruing from then until the next business hours. And in order to not be charged for those storage hours, you have to go in after hours to get them. Then you're paying another premium in order to avoid all of those storage fees. If it were the case that the storage hours did not accrue except during open business hours, then you remove that kind of incentivizing to tow after your business is closed. Do you see how the rationale behind the proposal?
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but it just doesn't it doesn't work that way. So it's not that like a tow company is like, I'm going to tow at night because then I get more after hours. The after hours is associated with the person picks up the car, and we don't know when they're going to pick up the car. In fact, the vast majority of the time, When a car's towed at night, people pick it up during regular business hours, not at night. So the after hours is not associated with I had to tow that car after hours. It's when do we have to have staff and support personnel there to release the car to the car owner, right? So that there's not an incentive to tow at night because you would get more like after hours fees. Furthermore, like a law enforcement towing, that there's not like an incentive there. Like you tow when the wreck happens and the law enforcement agency requests your assistance. So there's not an incentive structure there. I mean, to Mr. Conley's point, he would love to just tow during the day. That'd make our businesses much more profitable, but we can't, unfortunately. Mr. Conley.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, there is no incentive for night. Night towing is very few and far between. The days are way more profitable than the nights. If the nights were more profitable, I would just man it 24/7 and my impound would be open 24/7. But it doesn't generate enough revenue to even consider that. So just to put that on perspective. And then Trevor, you already hit on that the first 24 hours of storage is based by the hour. And it doesn't go to calendar day until after the first 24 hours. Just to clarify that.
Mr. Riley.
So a couple points of clarification just from the commission's perspective. So first off, just to respond to Ms. Rusha's points, we actually do have a definition of business hours under Rule 6501F, which is business hours means 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday, excluding legal holidays and any additional hours and days the towing carrier may designate. So I guess based on that definition, it's almost like the expectation is that towing carriers are going to work your standard business day, 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, excluding holidays. They can always have hours that extend beyond that, but that's at their discretion. And when you look at the after hours charge in and of itself, it basically says, anything that's done outside of business hours, which means anything outside of regular business hours that have not been designated as additional business hours by the towing carrier themselves, then that's when the towing carrier, it would be eligible for them to go ahead and assess that fee in those circumstances. Moving on to storage, as some of the others have indicated, we saw some substantial changes to the way storage charges work as a result of House Bill 2213-14 last year. It's a lot more complex now than it used to be. For some time now, many years, we run not on like a calendar day storage charge, but rather on a 24-hour rolling period. So for example, if you had a towing carrier and they essentially impounded a vehicle, like it hit their tow yard at 6 p.m., then they can assess up to the maximum for that 24-hour period of storage until that would count towards 6 p.m. the following day. So it's not like you would pay one storage fee from 6 p.m. to midnight, and then you automatically get another storage fee starting at midnight until the following midnight. It hasn't been that way for as long as I can remember. It's been a rolling 24-hour period. So, and our investigators do look at that. When we have cases come in and they're reviewing the charges, they are going to look at the exact time stamp that vehicle hit the impound lot. And then they're going to see when that vehicle was released and then look at what was charged for storage and make sure it's all lining up. So that's not unusual. They do that all the time with a lot of the cases that they work. So just to clarify on that, but again, the House bill last year did put a weird spin on it in that for private property tows, at least, basically you can really only charge the first 24 hours of storage until you do the statutory notification process. And that actually, even by statute, indicates that it is to be on a prorated basis. Continuing on to that, and this is all stuff that we're addressing in the current towing rulemaking that is going on right now. Next hearing is on the 25th, I believe, of this month. But yeah, the way we've restructured our rule regarding storage charges and how it all works is basically, again, it's going to depend on what kind of tow it is. Because again, the way the statute is worded, makes it seem like, okay, for this kind of tow, you have to do this. And then for that kind of tow, you have to do that. So we're trying to get that all sorted out and constructed within rule in a meaningful way where it's somewhat easier to understand than it may be if you just read the statutes. But basically, for certain types of tows, it is on a prorated basis for the entire duration of the tow. So even if you picked it up 7 days later, if you picked it up, whatever 7 days times 24 hours is, plus an additional 7 hours, that's exactly what you would pay. So you wouldn't be paying for any extra time that the vehicle wasn't stored in that facility. But then for other types of tows, we had to kind of work it in a different angle just because of the way the statute's set up. So again, we're really trying to make it as simplified as possible, given what the new statutory requirements are. It's been difficult, but we're working through it. But yeah, no, I do think that you are going to see quite a few circumstances that will necessitate the towing carrier to charge storage on an hourly basis, which is something we haven't really had in the past. So that is pretty new, and it's in effect now. It's just getting it backed up by rule. In addition to what's already in the statute, so that it's in a cogent format for the towing carrier to follow and understand.
Ms. Ruscia?
Thanks, Trevor. And thank you, Nate, for bringing those points up. I was struggling to remember where we were on the maths, and I just pulled up our current rules, and I looked at the rolling 24-hour rule that you referenced, and so I guess my thought was like, that starts the second the car enters the storage facility, right? So they've already been charged, right? There's the hookup fee, potential, fuel fee, whatever. And then, like there's nothing the consumer can do to prevent that initial hour or whatever it's going to be storage charge from happening unless they intercepted the vehicle and paid a drop fee, right? But once it leaves, does that make sense? Like there's already a storage fee that's going to happen. And then in terms of the business hours, I did have in my mind like 8 to 5, but I guess I'd interpret it as like that is when, I might have been wrong, but I had interpreted it as the PUC saying that an operator could not charge an after hours fee in that time period. But I mean, a company could actually really be open at 5:30 or 6, but the rule says 8 to 5. And then if it's after 5, that fee could kick in and they could just say it's after hours. Like, because it's kind of, it feels like it's subjective. But that's how I had interpreted it. So, and also the weekends, right? Like weekends are considered after hours. And so I think there needs to be more flexibility on that. Again, it might just be me or just me, or it might be in a minority here, but we do have a lot of fees and they all add up. Some of them are overlapping. And I guess I feel like there could just be more of a compromise on that, in that structure, particularly as it relates to like business hours.
You are correct in that in regards to the drop fee. Yeah, obviously the drop fee is gonna result in the lowest amount potentially being paid, if anything, because again, as part of the House bill from last year, there's now a prohibition on charging any drop fee for tows that originate from residential private properties. That's now out. And so again, we're in the process of amending our rules to make that clear, but currently that's already in effect because the statute's controlling right now. But I do think that's when you're going to pay the least amount, because at that point, a towing carrier has responded and is in the process of towing, but hasn't really done the work, hasn't moved the vehicle from one place to another, resulting in the mileage and the fuel surcharge. They haven't placed it in an impound lot, which with it comes its own associated costs, such as insurance for that facility, the safety and responsibility that they have to essentially take on for the storage of that vehicle, any employee costs, and all those other things associated with it. So yeah, when the vehicle does leave the property and has to go to that storage facility to be impounded, that's when those additional fees will kick in. So yeah, you are correct that the drop fee is going to result in the lowest amount of fees that could be possible. But again, even in those circumstances, sometimes there's no fees that can even legally be charged for such as residential tows.
Right. And I was just thinking, and I guess just for context, for my comments, I have actually been thinking of tows that were not residential, just because there's so much to be worked out. I was thinking of, broadly speaking, more out in whatever, you parked your car somewhere along Colfax, whatever, and it got towed or something. But I get and I get where you're coming from. I just, even if you were to only pay that drop fee, like, you'd have to be lucky enough to catch the operator, you know what I mean? Have the money, the right kind of payment, etc. And get your car. But the second that car is gone, right? It's like, there are several fees that just got attached to it. It's not just the one thing. And so I feel like we could strike a better balance. And I mean, whether it's like the after hours, maybe, like I'm hearing the feedback about the costs and stuff, but for me, it was like the after hours and the hours of operation rule, that like together seemed a little unfair, if that makes sense. Because the hours of operation, the 8 to 5, that's pretty restrictive. Anything outside of that is going to be like an extra fee. And we know that towing operators are going to be operating outside that, but the consumer is going to need the flexibility as well. And we're talking about, again, taking away someone's vehicle, that could be their access to work, the doctor, picking up their kids, etc. I mean, that I think we've established. I mean, that is a very, very big deal. So again, I think there could be a balance. I don't want to belabor the point, but just as we talk about, the what we tie fees to in terms of a CPI, a percentage, or some other kind of chart, I just wanted to remind folks that we have multiple fees. It's not just one thing. And even when we talk about what are the costs, when we did that survey, it was just like overall, right? We didn't really dig into a cost analysis based on the you know what I mean? Like the type of server, type of fee. Does that make sense? And so I wonder, I mean, I know it's more work, but like, I wonder if that's worth a discussion to have or to continue when we're talking about rates and what's fair. But I won't belabor the point, and I'll step. I know we've got other things to talk about in this meeting, but I appreciate everyone entertaining these ideas, and thank you, Nate, for that refresh.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Rusha, and don't apologize. We appreciate your input for sure. And we to your point of is not lost on me or Mr. Connolly or anyone in the towing industry that getting your car towed is a significant thing, right? Like, it's at least the worst thing that happened to you that month usually. And it's expensive and it costs a lot. And that's part of the reason Mr. Connolly continue to maintain that, like, we're not opposed to just saying it's free, that, tow operators can't charge citizens to get their car out. And then, the PUC can pay for it, or law enforcement, or private property owners. We 100% understand, but to the extent that you are going to, the state is going to decide that it's the responsibility of the vehicle owner to pay, the tow operators have to be able to generate a margin that is reasonable, and is reasonable enough to where one large operator isn't the only one who can survive, right? Like, if you reduced rates a lot or got rid of a lot of this stuff, frankly, I'd still be in business, but I might be the only one in business. And I don't think that's good for law enforcement agencies or the regular consumer. But again, we're completely fine with making it free. Mr. Connolly.
Yeah, and I agree with you on the options. I mean, we've been in business 50 years, and we saw a need for that hours. So our hours are 7:30 to 5:30, and we were open on Saturdays as well, because we saw a lot of consumers trying to get their vehicles out on the weekend. So it was beneficial for us, or we could be open on Saturday and be able to, pay our people to do that. We did cut our hours back on Saturdays 9 to 3 because we saw it dropping off drastically after COVID. So I mean, those are always good options and things like that. When a tower puts their hours of service, and PUC checks that, so like your one point where if the rule says 8 to 5, well, my company's open until 5:30. So if I tried to charge someone an after hours release at 5:15, PUC would hammer me to the wall because my business hours are posted to 5:30. So I have to follow what's posted. The profit margins aren't as intense as all may think. With that House bill that passed, I threw away 370 some private properties that I no longer tow private property towing because I cannot justify my income from private property towing to justify all the extras that were required in that House bill. So just when that shows you how much profit there actually is. There's not that much profit. I mean, not enough to where I threw away 300 plus customers. So, I mean, that probably made Trevor happy, but there's not as much profit as you think. The first task force, when we were doing the pricing, we tried to come up with a flat rate to try to make it easier. The problem is the reason there are more fees. So say like mileage. So right now there's a mileage fee. Well, one could argue that here in the Denver Metro, it doesn't need to really be a mileage fee because most towers are within 10 miles of their location. But when you get out to the outskirts and you have a yard that's in Junction and they have to go to Montrose to do a private property, it's a lot of miles to travel. That's why there was a mileage fee put in. So that kind of took away that flat rate. The storage, when you get into certain areas of the state, storage facilities zoned for disabled vehicles are very hard to come by, especially in Denver Metro. And so those costs are extreme. So for someone to have that, it puts a huge cost on them. Now, the problem with the loss, that's what makes towing so expensive, is the loss. If towing was free to the consumer and we let free market take over, that would cure a lot of problems. That would cure the problems of the consumers. That would also cure problems in the loss, because the towers would then be paid for everything. They wouldn't have a loss, which then you could drop the price a little bit because you wouldn't have the loss. But there's a sticky way around that. It becomes very difficult. So when we're doing the pricing, we're looking at different avenues and things like that. We have to look at so many different things. When you were first talking about, the after hours release and things like that, and I'm looking at it from my view and how I run a company, I cannot compete with one truck companies. And let me give you a scenario. If you have one truck and you are a solo operator, you don't have to have comp insurance. That saves you a buttload of money. You don't have to have a dispatcher if you're running off a cell phone in your pocket. So if you really have a tow truck, a cell phone, and you're living in an apartment complex, you can make some pretty damn good money on the current rates because you have no overhead. So there's that other structure there. So, but PUC doesn't regulate what it takes to be a business. I mean, really, if you have a truck, insurance, and your money, you get a permit. And there's no qualifications beyond that puts the competition on the same playing field, if that makes sense. So with it not being a fair playing field, it's very hard to regulate all the companies and the different style of companies in the state. And so you leave big openings for massive profits on one end, shortfalls on the other. It's a very unique industry. Just food for thought.
Ms. Russo.
Thank you. So I had a clarification, a clarifying question regarding the law. Does the law prohibit operators from charging private property owners, or does the law simply prescribe or permit operators to charge consumers and set guidelines? Like, is the law silent on charging property owners? You know, like apartment complexes.
But no, the law, this is where things got really screwed up. And I'm trying to go back in time, trying to figure out what happened here. The towing companies are providing a service, right? So it used to be you broke down and you needed a tow to a repair shop, right? And then the cities grew and things got crazy. And then pretty soon you had people crashing and going to the hospitals, and now you need tow trucks to come clear the roadways and get them open. And then you started getting complexes. There were great big complexes and too small parking lots. And so now it's no different than a snow removal. If you got snow on the road or in the parking lot, you got to hire a snow removal company. Well, that's pretty much what a tow company is. They're a service company. They're providing a service. The problem is that the tower, it's all been dumped on the towers to deal with the problem. So whether it's law enforcement, whether it's a property owner, hey, I have this is in our way, we need it removed. And the tower comes and removes it and takes all risk to do everything, to process it, to dispose of it if no one claims it, everything. The tower is pretty much just taken on all of that burden. And that's what's been lost. There's no law that says that the property owners shouldn't pay for that, or law enforcement, or the state of Colorado. I mean, think about this. Who pays to have the snow removed from I-70? Who pays to have the snow removed from an apartment complex? So when you look at that concept, the tower is a service provider that's providing the service, but yet somehow over the course of time, the tower has now been the dump all. They're responsible to deal with all this crap, and then they're responsible to take all the heat when it goes bad. So when you try to figure out how that got to where it is, it's perplexing.
Ms. Russo, to more direct, no. So there is nothing in law or rule that says that a tow carrier could charge the property for the towing of a car. In fact, that does happen a little bit. So there are times when a private property tow might occur, and the property says, I'll give you one example that's happened before. A new resident moves in, and the property was supposed to give them their permit, and they never gave them a permit. The resident literally didn't know that they were supposed to have a permit or didn't have one. The property has rules that say, hey, you get towed if you don't have a permit. That person gets towed, and the property would call the tow company and say, hey, we messed up. They shouldn't have gotten towed. We didn't give them a permit. Please bill us. And then the tow company would invoice the property for that. And now that's an edge case, because that's when the property actually made a mistake. But yeah, theoretically, there's no law that says that, all the towing fees and bills and at that point they'd be unregulated, right? It would just be a free market transaction. Could fall upon the property owner. From the tow company standpoint, I don't think me or Mr. Conley care, as long as we can pay our employees and stay in business. I think we're happy campers. We don't care who pays us. In fact, that'd make our lives a lot more easy, and I could get rid of the bulletproof glass and razor wire and stuff, right? I think a private property owner might say, and I'll use one example. Sometimes people park in other people's literal driveways at their homes, right, or at their HOAs. That property owner or that condo owner might say, wait a minute, this person just came and parked on my property. That is my property. I own it. They're stealing my ability to park in my space. That's not right. They're stealing from me. That's mine. And so why, when I need to get that car removed so I can get my car out of my garage in the morning and take my kids to school, should I be forced to pay that towing fee for that person stealing from me, right? that would be the argument that person might make, because there's a different part of this transaction. Some company standpoint, I don't think we care, but that's what a property owner might say. Mr. Pierce.
Sure. So I appreciate all these comments, and I was hoping to revisit a proposal I made way back last year, which is basically a combination of what is in place now and the idea of just charging the property owner, and that's a shared version where basically what you can do is set fines for the consumer, the person, the non-consensual consumer, that are fixed and treated more like parking tickets, that what you would get from law enforcement for improper parking, and would be hopefully indexed so that they were at similar rates, so that the severity of the offense is comparable across the board. And so those would be, say, required to get your vehicle back. You would have to cover those fines, but those would be lower than the towing company's cost. And then the property owner would be responsible for covering the extra amount. And then the free market could be used basically in a service contract with a towing company. And so that was an idea I've been trying to play around with for quite a while, because it seems to me like it addresses everybody's concerns. One of mine, and I hope I'm hearing Ms. Rusha right, is that from the consumer standpoint, this is basically like a penalty, and if the consumer has to pay the full penalty, or sorry, the full cost of the tow, that's the penalty is far in excess of the severity of the offense. And so there's a justice issue there, but at the same time, it's not enough to cover the tower's cost. And so that has to be accommodated somehow. And so how do you figure that out? One way of doing it is free market. Another way of doing it is I don't know, through taxes that then get redistributed to towing companies to cover the extra amount. But at any rate, it's not solely shouldered by the consumer. And it's similar for all kinds of other law enforcement issues. So if people are put in jail, they don't have to pay the full cost of being incarcerated. The taxpayer covers that cost. So there's a lot of cost sharing going on, and my view is that the most fair way of dealing with this is some kind of shared structure where the consumer is not hit quite so hard, and that there's some disincentivizing for landlords so that they don't tow in contexts where it's more of a hair trigger offense, which again, in my experience, we're hearing very large examples of. So I just want to throw that as a possible direction to move if there's a stomach for it.
I generally really like that. Again, from my perspective, there's other perspectives from especially our government folks. Certainly from my perspective, I think that'd be great. Like, if you told me today, like, hey, Trevor, all your people who are getting towed, we're going to cut their bill by 75%. So they're only going to pay 25%. And the other 75% will be covered by the taxpayer. I would say, I think that person is still going to be incentivized to not park illegally next time, because it's still a pain. Even if it's a smaller fee, it still costs money. It's still a pain. So I think it fixed that problem. And if the taxpayer is paying it, that's fine with me too. In fact, the collections would be much higher. So from the tourist perspective, I'm perfectly okay with that. I mean, we all know tax money is funny money, right? It's not real money. So sure, I think that'd be a great idea. Mr. Hahn.
Hi, thanks. One of the things, I was in a meeting earlier today where we were talking about was it House Bill or Senate Bill 1217, House Bill 1217. And one of the things that came up in that discussion, and I think is probably important to talk about here as we, whatever future recommendations from this group happen to be, is so often the term non-consensual tow is like that's the focus of many discussions. But there are different realities under that very big umbrella, which is non-consensual tow. And we've kind of alluded to it here a couple of times, and that's the law enforcement tow to clear a roadway because there's been a crash. Vehicle's in the middle of the road, it's on its roof, and I've got I-25 shut down, and I need to get the road open. The individual that was in the car, whether it was the owner, the driver, whomever, doesn't have that ability to engage in a transaction with a tow company. It's a matter of, we just need the public safety need is to get the road open. Non-consensual, right? It's that property owner, the vehicle owner, doesn't have an opportunity to negotiate some rate with the tow company. They're really at the will of law enforcement, who has a tow rotation list that says, just call me the next wrecker and let's move this thing out of here. I think that's important to kind of have that in mind, that not all non-consensual tows are created equal. And this may have been hashed out and discussed before. I'm still the relatively new person to the group. But any recommendation, I think, has to move with that thought in mind, because there are some, in that case, non-consensual tows that may be covered by insurance, such that a mechanism to provide reimbursement for or provide funding for that non-consensual tow, the police tow because there's a crash, insurance may be paying for that, provided the car owner had adequate insurance or had insurance at all, that kind of thing. So just wanted to throw that out there for discussion, or at least for folks to have in the back of their mind as we look toward whatever next set of recommendations might look like. There's some distinct differences.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Hahn. Ms. Russo.
Thank you. I think so. I like the idea just from an equity standpoint of making these fees more like a moving traffic violation. I think that seems like it's more fair. However, I would just caution from a collection standpoint, some municipalities do have a hard time, collecting on those fees. In fact, I think like the city and county of Denver, like last year, ended up voting to like waive. I remember there was something where fees were going to collection agencies. They weren't getting paid. It was costing the city. And I think they called it a loss. And I don't know I don't know what it was, but municipal fees here and there. So, but it does seem kind of, from a public safety standpoint, it does seem a little crazy that, you park your car in the wrong spot, it gets towed, and you might be out $360 or whatever, right? But like you're, I don't know, speeding or did something else, and it's like $185. You know what I mean? One is significantly more dangerous than the other, but the costs are wildly different. So I like that concept, and I think that's worth exploring. And I also wanted to, in terms of funding for things and different funding mechanisms, it might be worth, like, particularly as it relates to like victims assistance, where someone's a victim of a crime and there's a law enforcement involved tow, and they're either not covered, or it was you know what I mean? There's a situation where someone has to pay to get their vehicle back. Like there is a potential funding mechanism could be from license plate fees, just like $1 or $2, on a certain kind of license plate can actually generate a lot of revenue. And so, or anyway, and I hope that would make the PUC relieved, because that's a different department that have to deal with that. But anyway, just kind of throwing it out there as we're talking about
different ways to pay for things. But I really do like Mr. Pierce's just precept about the fairness, and looking at this as more of a civil violation. And finally, I just wanted to comment, if you park your vehicle in someone else's private property, that is trespassing, actually. And depending on where you live, you can get assistance from like local law enforcement to get that car ticketed or towed. But it certainly is a, depends on where you are, what kind of, home you live in, and such. But I guess I just wanted to point out that it's literally trespassing.
Thanks, Mr. Risha. Just a thought question, Mr. Hahn. If one of your officers received a call that said, someone called because someone's in their parking space, it's trespassing, please respond. I don't know that law enforcement agencies have the time to respond to people in other people's parking spots. I agree with you 100%, Mr. Risha, as a practical matter. Like, I don't think that legitimately would be treated by law enforcement agencies as trespassing. And it wouldn't remedy the situation. But I could be wrong. Mr. Hahn might be able to fill us in on that.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't think so. I mean, I think if you're talking about an apartment complex, so the difference, the apartment complex and somebody's in my designated spot, I have spot 1, 2, 3, and that was, per my lease, that's my spot. Probably not. That's a civil matter. I mean, if anything, I suppose law enforcement would respond to try to mediate if there was an argument or something like that going on, but I don't imagine would weigh into those waters. It's a civil matter between the tenant and the tenant and whoever it is that owns the complex and the person that parked in their spot.
And if I could just clarify, I mean, like I said, it depends on what kind of property you're in and who owns what. I'm talking about, if you're in a home and someone blocks your driveway or whatever, or they're in your driveway or something like that. So it's going to vary, but in that case,
I'd like to challenge that, Mr. Richard, because this comes up a lot when we have discussions with people. Is this happened with lawmakers? So one of them lives in Boulder and has a really nice house. And when we were having discussions, I posed that to her. I said, well, if someone was in your driveway, like blocking you in or blocking you out of your driveway, like, shouldn't you be able to remove that car? And she goes, well, yeah, but that's different, right? Like this perspective somehow that if you're wealthy enough to live in a single family home or a condo and you have your own parking garage, that somehow that's different. You should be protected. But, my employees, like, they don't make a ton of money. I'd like to pay them more, but they don't make a ton. And they live in apartment complexes. Some have a reserve spot. I don't think that they shouldn't be able to protect their reserve spot that they pay for because they live in an apartment complex, or someone, for example, who lives in a trailer community, right? Because it's a trailer community, not a single family home, and they can't afford to live in a single family home, that their property and their space doesn't deserve the same protection that someone in a house would. This comes up a lot, and I'm not trying to attack you that's what you meant. But
it's not what I meant. And
Yeah,
that's not what I said. I was just pointing out that parking in someone's private property without permission is trespassing, and varies by jurisdiction. And, like here in Denver, if somebody were in my driveway blocking my garage, I could call 311 or non-emergency DPD, and that person would be ticketed. But I know that's not what I was saying. And I don't ever mean to suggest that, a person should have more rights or liberties, based on class. In fact, that's why I'm here as a consumer protection advocate. But I appreciate that concern that you raised, Trevor, and I agree with you. So.
And I do just something you made earlier that I think I 1000% agree with is that the cost of retrieving your car if it's towed. And again, to Mr. Hahn's point, there's two distinctions, right? Like if you get in a wreck and you get taken to the hospital and you come get your car later, like it's not a punishment, right? Like it's not a fine, it's not a penalty. It's just that the service costs money. And the state and all of the other states in America have decided, maybe this is right or wrong, that the consumer or their insurance company or whatever is going to bear that cost, not the state, not the government. And so it's a reimbursement for a service that unfortunately just tends to be extremely expensive because of insurance requirements and fuel and just life in general. So it's not a penalty. On the private property side, I view it the same way. Like if a car is removed from like a fire lane or someone's reserved spot, the amount we're charging is we're not trying to punish the person. Like I'm not a law enforcement agency. Like that's not my job to like kind of punish people or change the behavior. It's that car needed to move. It was in someone else's spot. It was in a handicap spot. It was in a fire lane, whatever. And it was not supposed to be there. There's a reason why. And so it was removed, and that service cost money. Now, I do agree that like if you view it as a penalty, I don't think the punishment fits the crime. Like I think if it's for the purpose of teaching the person a lesson or something along those lines, which is not the purpose, but if it was, I think it's too expensive. Like I don't think it requires $300 or whatever to kind of, if you're going to penalize someone, I think, frankly, going to get your car when it gets impounded is so inconvenient that no one wants to get impounded even if it was free. Right? It's just not a good experience. But the issue is that like it's a service that has to be reimbursed, and the state has decided that like the citizen is going to bear that cost. And I think that's what Mr. Pierce is saying. I really like the concept. I mean, I think we have to think through it of saying that like, look, like that's too much for a citizen to have to pay. We recognize that the service has to be provided. So the government, the taxpayer in some fashion is going to fund that, right? I don't know if the AG's office, Mr. Roberts, the AG's office would like to pay for it, or the PUC would like to pay for it. I'd love to hear their thoughts on that. But I agree with you. It's really expensive. And certainly I'm all for the taxpayer paying for that, not the citizen.
Yeah. Actually, to clarify, a super important component of my proposal is that the private property owner is covering some of this. So
Yeah,
the way I was thinking of it is that you do fund the towing in part through a service contract with apartment complexes, condominium owners, manufactured home park owners, as an ongoing service, and then they get charged more or less for the number of tows that they have to incur.
I have a question. You live in a like a manufactured home community, correct?
Right. Manage.
So actually you might be able to answer this, but I'm just curious. So, and maybe yours doesn't, but some manufactured home or trailer park complexes have very bad parking issues for a variety of reasons. I think you probably have seen that. Let's say that's what was going to happen. You're like, okay, the property owner is going to bear that cost, right? If your property management company, the property owner, just determined that like, no, we don't feel like paying for that, right? Like I don't want to pay that money. It's a lot of money, and I'm not going to do it. And in which case, the towing company would say, well, we're not going to service that property. We're not going to tow any cars because there's no revenue for us to pay for that service. What would happen then? Would you not be in the position of just having to say, well, I guess that, Mr. Pierce's home or someone else's home, if someone's in your spot, what options would you have at that point? If someone was in your spot, Mr. Pierce, and the private property owner decided that they weren't willing to pay to enforce parking rules?
Well, just to recall, I do manage the park that I'm in. So I'm coming at this both as a homeowner and property management. So the issue there is basically that you end up having very dissatisfied residents who have their parking not fulfilled, and you should have community rules in place, and it's rare that there are community rules that don't address parking. And so typically, because you have the community rules in place, your residents have some legal rights to complain to the mobile park oversight program if you're not enforcing those rules. And so there's some minimum habitability and minimum standards that as a park owner you have to live up to. And so you can't just say, oh, we don't want to pay for it. You can get complaints, and then if it comes to it, receive a cease and desist order to change your practices. There's also county and I don't know at the state level, but there's expired tags requirements, at least in Boulder County. The county will itself come in and say to the property owners, you can't have these cars in your location, and we're going to fine you unless you get rid of those. So there's plenty of incentives to maintain decent parking arrangements. But the flip side of that is that there's no cost to you whatsoever if you are engaging in hair trigger codes, or if you have, say, some issues with a resident and you dislike the person, and a good way of sending them a clear signal that you don't want them in your park is to tow their car at the slightest infraction. And at least from hearing of other residents in other parks, that actually does happen, despite some comments that one of the other task force members made. This is very much an experience that I've fielded multiple times from my seat as Kokomo. So at any rate, just circling back just to get to this question, I think there's very strong incentives for the property owners to keep their properties well maintained and keep the parking sufficiently enforced. And so it seems to me that there's a good enough incentive to want to pay for it. And also, if they have to pay for it, and it is by a per tow percentage, likelihood of how many tows they're going to have in any given year, they're going to think twice about how many times they call the tower. And to me, that's a beautiful way of kind of balancing out the cost of the tows with the number of times you ask for it. And without that counter incentive, if there's no cost to you, why not? Give the tower a call.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Connolly.
All right. I think I like the idea. I mean, on House Bill, what the hell was it last year or this year? 1217, 1314. No, that was the year before. 1217 was this year, right? The victims bill. The towers supported that bill. The problem they had was they couldn't find funding. They couldn't figure out how to pay for it, to pay for the service. I think it's a great avenue to explore. We just got to figure out where's the money come from. And I mean, that's something we could probably dive into. Where can the money come from?
Yeah, John makes a good point. That and y'all need to be aware. I'll describe it real quick. 1217. Brett McFrolich, and Senator Fields, I think, spearheaded this. A great idea, and hopefully it gets done. Basically, when folks get their car stolen, often it ends up in impound yards at the direction of the police agencies. So the police agency will require the car to be impounded, and the person who got their car stolen, generally, with some exceptions, has to go pay to get it out, right? And the idea is like, okay, this person, they got their car stolen, which is sucky and it was not their fault, and then now they're having to pay the tow bill. And so the idea was like, well, let's find a way for those victims. And there's a variety of, someone who's a victim of domestic abuse, and there's a variety of other areas. Stolen cars are the most common. Let's find a way to have them not have to pay for that. And the towing industry was like, absolutely, right? Like, sure, like that sounds great. It sucks that they have to pay. And the issue came up with when it actually came down to a fiscal note and having to actually pay for it and have taxpayers pay for it. That's when it gets stalled out. That it's as a practical matter, it's hard to do large revenue or revenue requirement increases at the state level. And so maybe there's some creative ideas around where you could raise that revenue. But just a bill that y'all should know that's out there because it kind of impacts us a little bit, and hopefully it gets worked out. Ms. Rusha. I think you're on mute still, Joanne. Yeah, there you go.
Sorry, I was trying to switch screens so I can unmute because I was trying to find that bill so I could see the fiscal note. So I will go try to look that up. But I have a question. I guess I want to go back to my other question of that legal question. Like I want to clarify or be clear or get a clarification. There is nothing in state law right now that prohibits a towing operator from entering into a contract with a private property owner, be it an apartment complex, correct? Regarding towing.
Correct.
Okay.
We actually about 15, 20 years ago, that's how we operated. When someone in an apartment complex needed a vehicle towed, we would go tow it and we would process it. And we used to charge them $150. And that was back in 95 to 2005 ballpark area.
And okay, and then so my follow-up is, so right now, like if an operator services or provides service to an apartment complex, I'm assuming there's some contract in place. Like, does that complex like literally have like no cost, or
it's no cost? It's all put on the consumer. The contract in place is just an agreement that you, the tower, are going to do the towing for this complex because the PUC has rules and guidelines that kind of shape that. It has to have the right signage and the right placement of signs, and have to have authorized people and things like that to do that. So it's all been thrown. That's what I'm saying. We could go back in time and find out where it all got thrown on to the consumer. It kind of just happened. I can't look it back and see where the pivotal point was on that, of where it all just came solely on the shoulders of the towers to take all the responsibility for that and only collect from the consumers.
okay, because I think in this model, I mean, from my perspective, it feels like it would just incentivize the operator to tow for every small infraction, right? Because the private property owner is not going to be incentivized to patrol the parking lot, you know what I mean, to see if your parking tag expired by one day,
Sure.
So
and I've seen, and that's where things have gotten really, really stupid, is technically, and I haven't seen this, but it could be, I could be a property owner and say, I'm going to hire Trevor, and Trevor, I want you to patrol my parking lot every 30 minutes. And I don't want a pink car parked in my parking lot ever. And you're going to do that, or I'm going to fire you and get some other tower to do it. I could do that because there's no rules against that, me as a property owner. I could literally say, you can't come on my property unless you're wearing a pink tutu. That's my right as being a property owner. I can do anything. And so my question is, why? I've always said this: if the property owner has to pay the full bill, there won't be any oopses on what car's towed. And I'm not trying to be a hard ass here, and I'm not trying to be insensitive, but it's not my problem. I'm the tower. I'm the service guy. Cars parked in a parking lot is not my problem. That's someone else's problem. I'm a solution to their problem. That's it. I have no stake in the game if I tow one car from there or 20 cars from there. And the incentive that gets thrown on the towers is, well, you have the incentives to just go hook and book. Well, yes and no. It still costs me money to take that driver and that truck and send it to tow a car. That cost is the cost. Whether it's one tow or 20 tows, it's the same cost every single time that truck rolls. So, yeah, I mean, the more you do, you might get a little bit more revenue because you're You're doing a little more in bulk, but it's not that much. And that's where things get skewed. But no, there is no rule for that. And I would love it, because there's a lot of things that the law enforcement does and the private properties that pretty much screw you as a tower. And it's one of these things where you kind of get the good with the bad. So if I want to tow for an apartment complex, or if I want to tow for law enforcement, I have to take the good from the bad. So if whoever is hiring me, whether it's the property owner or the law enforcement, they say, hey, I need you to come move this car. We have this car, or we have this motorhome, right? So if I have to tow a motorhome out of the road for law enforcement, I don't get paid on that. If I take that motorhome out of an apartment complex, I'm not getting paid on that. That is a complete loss, 100%. But if I sign the contract saying I'm going to do the job, that's all the job. It's no different than snow removal. If it snows 2 inches, I got to remove 2 inches. If it snows 10 feet, I got to remove 10 feet, because that's what I was hired to do. That's the job I was hired to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So, and I guess I'm again, looking at this from where's the incentive, or because it's the predatory stuff that is how we have regulations around, receipts and timestamps and photos, documentation, etc. Right? And that's also why legislators keep coming back every year or so. And so that's why I think that's why folks are asking the questions. Sorry.
No, you're good. And that's
sorry.
the thing is the problem is you have that.
Remove the incentive. So I guess the other thing is like if private property owner, has a contract with ABC Towing Company, and ABC Towing Company can come in, patrol the property, whenever, for whatever infraction, and the individual employee, the driver, also gets paid a performance bonus. Again, that person is incentivized to tow for every little thing, and then again, it becomes a consumer protection issue, and it becomes did you really park on the line? Or, is it really fair for someone to need to pay $360 and lose their car or whatever, because they, because their parking tag is expired by a day or something. And so that's where that's why that's where my questions are coming from. Because I think that's an important part of this conversation. And even though we don't make the rules, it doesn't mean that we can't,
Put
point
something out there.
Yeah, put something out there, and then finally, I feel like I've taken up a lot of hot air today, and I really apologize. And I have to hop off soon. But I did want to say, for me, it would be helpful to understand, and I don't know if it just changes based on the size of the operator or location or whatever, but how many of these tows are happening in the daytime hours versus nighttime, or how many are happening on the weekend versus Monday? Does that make sense?
Sure.
We don't have that data, and I don't know how much it varies by type of company. And so for me, that would be helpful. So, whether that's anecdotal or there are some resources, I think just for me as a task force member, I would find that information useful, so that I had that context moving forward.
The issue with that is it varies on the site, right? So if you have in the daytime, you could have it to where it's a lot of business parking in the daytime. At nighttime, it could be a lot of say fire lanes or permitted parking spots being done. Somewhere where there's a Bronco game or a concert, and areas around that are getting messed up. It's law enforcement. It's the same thing. It could be weather related. It could be it could be construction. There's so many variables to try to. It doesn't actually go to the company. It goes more into you kind of look at it like, I'm gonna go back to the snow removal, right? Did it snow 2 inches or 10 feet? And did it snow that way across the entire state or just in certain areas? So it's the same concept with towing. It depends on what's going on at that particular area and what in those particular times, or what the particular problems are at a particular location. So it can vary drastically.
Okay, and maybe this just goes back to the problem we identified in the very beginning of this new iteration of the task force is, you know, we don't know, you know, how many operators are doing what types of tows, and so it's kind of hard to make some of these assumptions or to scale any of that data. And so we just have to, like, you know, really invest or push, you know, for a change in that process so that we can collect better data, because that will ultimately be more fair to everybody, I think, and help us, you know, make better sense of where to start and what variables we should be looking at. You know, because, you know, like for your business, Mr. Connolly, is going to be very different, I think, from Trevor's. And
Night,
I
night and
understand,
day. Yes, night and
yeah,
day.
night and day. And we also probably have regional differences as well. Even like when we're talking about operations cost or employee cost, I mean, you know, even with inflation, the cost of living in Pueblo, you know, is still significantly cheaper, you know, than Denver or Aurora. So maybe while these are like great conversations, it's, you know, we just need to figure out how we can get better data. But again, I didn't mean to take up too much hot air, but I appreciate all this, and I guess I just want to say again, like, if there is like industry information or you know, particularly as it relates to, like, you know, cost or regulations or things like that, I benefit from knowing those, you know, even if it just comes in an article. So like, if this is permissible, like, you know, if that's something that folks want to share, and we just, you know, give it to Nate and he can send it out, I will personally read it. So for whatever that's worth, I'm happy to take that information and process it as an individual board member so that I could better understand from the business perspective.
Mr. Pierce? I think you're on mute, Mr. Pierce.
Great, thanks. I'm a little just confused about, Ms. Rocha, your worry that there's still incentivizing to tow under the model that we've been talking about, just because if it's treated more like snow removal, it seems to go in the opposite direction, because with snow removal, you're charged per visit, and part of your snow removal contract is, as you say, what's the amount of inches that are going to trigger a visit. And so if you're going to be cheap, you're going to say, I don't know, 4 inches. Don't tow unless there's 4 inches of snow on the ground. Or if you want to be really, really tidy, it's going to be come on out when there's 2 inches. But you're paying per visit, and so you've got this incentive not to cover stuff unless you absolutely need it. And you've got a clientele that can cover the bill. So at any rate, I'm confused about where the negative incentive, your thoughts about where that, or sorry, a counterproductive incentive came in, because I was seeing how that occurred.
I apologize. No, what I'm saying is I think our current system is, you know, can incentivize tows for the wrong reasons. And so that's why I was actually, as I was trying to explore, like, you know, as it stands right now, what might potentially incentivize, you know, tows that folks might think are unfair or unreasonable, right? Because we're also talking about costs and trying, you know, we've been talking about balancing. So
So to clarify, I was on the current state of affairs, not your proposal, which I think does, as long as there were guardrails around the property owner, I think, because we don't want them turning around and charging, the car owner an obscene amount or something. I think that your proposal might be more in line of what would be equitable and maybe just easier from a business perspective. So I didn't have I wasn't concerned about what you were saying. I was just stating my concern with the existing process.
Gotcha. Thanks.
So it sounds like a lot of good stuff today. It sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, that there's some agreement, and Mr. Prunski and Mr. Holland and Mr. Riley jump in if this is incorrect, that there's some appetite for saying, hey, what if you just said that consumers don't have to pay? That basically, if your car is towed non-consensually, whether it's from private property or law enforcement, which is usually from public property, that you don't have to pay. And in the law enforcement portion, I guess maybe the law enforcement agency or the taxpayer would pay the tow bill. And on the private property owner or the homeowner or whatever would be required to pay for that service. If there's some agreement that some version of that would be great. I will say I don't know that that's within the scope of what we can recommend, but certainly I don't know that it's not, because it's not really regarding rates. It's a fundamental, change for how things are approached kind of throughout the country in towing. But it seems like there's some agreement. But our law enforcement experts and Mr. Rowdy, do you have any kind of thoughts on that model? Any thoughts on how that might or might not work? Mr. Hahn.
Yeah, I mean, there's ultimately it comes down to cost in current budget structures within law enforcement agencies. If it were a circumstance where, say for CSP, and I don't know how many tows we do every year for whatever reason, whether it's a crash or it's subsequent to an arrest or whatever the case may be. Although I would say that the number of tows subsequent to arrest is relatively small. The majority of the tows that we have done are with a wreck or an abandoned vehicle that's in the way of snow removal operations, that kind of thing. Certainly, there's no mechanism that law enforcement. I guess I'll just speak for mine, but I would be surprised if there's a law enforcement agency out there that has any room in existing budgets to cover the cost of tows. And I would presume the same is true with CDOT or County Road and Bridge or the city road and bridge folks, if it's on a city street or a county street. So that's something that certainly have to be thought through. Also, there is some incentive, I guess, if your vehicle is on the side of I-25 or I-70 because of car trouble or whatever, there is some incentive to expeditiously get your vehicle out of the way. Certainly not always the case, but because you don't want it towed, we put a notice on there. We tell people they have 48 hours to come get it. And I wonder if that would disincentivize people from, well, if it's going to get towed, or incentivize people to abandon vehicles on the side of the road, the vehicle that isn't running anymore. They don't want to have anything else to do with it. They just want to get out from under it and they leave it on the shoulder of the road because law enforcement's going to have to tow it and then pay the bill for it. So those are the kinds of things that we have to kind of think through, I think, before any sort of a recommendation along those lines. I would be comfortable with anything moving forward. But
Mr. Prunski?
Yeah, I'd be curious to see what that looks like. I know just for us, the tow company that has our impound contract, they bid for that every year. So they tell us, this is the amount they can do it in, knowing what our tow rates are, and that's how they're getting paid. So the city's already covering those costs. But as far as like the rotational and the abandoned vehicle stuff, I mean, those are, I guess, worked into that bid because we have that specific company that does all the impounds. So I'd be curious on some of the other instances, as far as like the rotational stuff. I mean, that makes it consensual on the crashes and things like that.
Gotcha. Ms. Rucha?
Thanks. So I just looked at at the fiscal, and it wasn't clear to me, did the fiscal assume that like all the costs that insurance carriers would otherwise be paying, or we're just talking about the folks that would, where the insurance would not cover it, but they were victims of a crime? That'd be my first question. And then I guess the second question I just had for those who were present at the bill, were there any suggestions that folks had that might have reduced the fiscal note, you know, either limiting some of the reimbursement or the overhead costs? Because
the fiscal was only for staff that would run the program. The numbers in the towing to cover the towing costs of those, and we only did, here was the problem. The numbers that we gave were just over 18 million would have been the fiscal for towing, and that only would have covered stolen vehicles that were recovered. That didn't cover anything for any other kind of victim. And that was problem one, is defining what victims were going to be paid, or what victims were going to be covered, because some of those victims had insurance, but there was no data on which ones had insurance or not. So just to go on a basic tow, I think it was, we figured it out at 3 days of storage and the tow, 1 hour tow, 3 days of storage. The numbers, it came just over 18 million just to cover towing in the state of Colorado for recovered vehicles.
okay, so my understanding, like, if you are like, you could like technically apply through like the Victims Compensation Fund. I don't remember what it's officially called, like through the local, usually I think it's the district attorney's office. But that's like a long, it can be a complicated process, and compensation can be difficult. But so maybe if this bill came forward in the future in a different iteration, there could be something that is like tied into a structure that already exists, but just making that process easier, you know, and maybe that would reduce some of that overhead costs, you know, and even if it didn't pay for the total cost of the tow, maybe it could, you know, reduce the pain a little bit for the victim. You know what I mean? Like, perhaps we could do something, even if we couldn't completely make that person whole. But anyway, I really appreciate, I love that this is something we all agree on. And I think it would be great, even though if it's not maybe the you know, the task for this committee, or you know, like really under our primary purview, if that's something that maybe we could talk about it in the future, because I would be interested in advocating for this next session or the session after, and maybe trying to find a way to start something, you know, even if it wasn't you know, as broad as the sponsors wanted to do.
Sure. I mean, I think that's the biggest hurdle. And honestly, if they would dial in on what a victim is, okay, and not have such a broad, open category. I mean, there's a lot of people that have full coverage insurance, so that when their car gets stolen, it's covered, or someone that crashes into them, you know, same thing. They have to do real hardships. And so currently right now, tow companies deal with that on a case by case. And so there's many times where we'll take and give a car for free, and we'll eat that as the tower to help out a victim, but that's a true victim. And normally I hear those cases personally and make that decision, you know, myself. And they are out there. And I think that would be a lot easier if they could dial that in. It would really help a lot. And no, to go on that point, there is no law enforcement in the state of Colorado that can pay for their towing services. That doesn't exist, and I don't foresee that existing in my lifetime. So I don't see where we're going to go there. The making the property owners pay for their tow and split that with the consumer, I think that's a good avenue to go. I think that might help us with legislators on the other side, because there is money out there. There was something that Polis did. There was a crime bill of, I don't know, billions of dollars or something, but towing was excluded from that. If they would add towing to that, that would put up, it'd make our jobs a lot easier. I'll tell you that.
Mr. Hahn?
Yeah, I'll just be brief. But the item we're talking about there, House Bill 1217, it's the way it ended up. The item that ultimately ended up passing was for the TLRC, the Transportation Legislative Review Committee, to further examine that issue in the interim. And I believe it's the 20. I have to look. TLRC is meeting
24th.
here in a couple. 24th. Yes, thank you. 24th. And that's one of the issues that they're going to be discussing. So I don't think there have been any determinations made yet, but that's kind of where that bill landed, was that it was going to be something reviewed in the interim. Also, we talked a little bit about data before. I was talking to, in specific to victims of auto theft. We're gonna try to gather some data that can point us in the direction of, well, how many times at least is the auto theft victim, is there a time where a vehicle is stolen and then it is a law enforcement tow that comes as a result of that? So that's something I'd be happy to share with this group next time we meet, to at least scope that part of the issue, because I agree that the point from before, we need to have some data to get a better sense of before going down the path of any sort of a recommendation that exactly scope out the problem and what it is.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Hahn. All right, so we're 6 over, so we can go ahead and get moving and conclude. We had a little more participation today. Are we still interested in a meeting next month, or do we want to kind of gap it again? Who has an opinion either way in that?
I would like us to continue. I think this is moving in a good direction, and we did not have a chance really to think about other kinds of indices for the automatic adjustments, annual adjustments. So it would be nice to pick up that thread as well. So I would propose that we do plan on meeting again.
Yep, I'm good with that. Let's unless anyone has any objections, let's plan on a meeting the second week in August. I'm sorry, the second Wednesday in August, same time.
It's August 9th, everybody.
August 9th. So let's do that, and we'll pick up from there.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, thanks everybody.
All right.
Thanks, all.
See you, Nate.
Take care, Jen.